It's an emotional response that is central to our life in Jesus Christ. And that's not just me saying that. It's something that comes up frequently in the teaching of Jesus himself. Of course, here we recognize it well in this particular parable, but there's other parables that I think are the meat and potatoes of kingdom life. And as you reflect on them, you realize a lot of what they have to speak is having a proper emotional reaction to the people around you. Think of the parable of the wicked servant as found in Matthew chapter 18. You might be familiar with him. He owes his master a lot of money. He comes and begs the master. The master forgives his debt. He has compassion on him. And then this wicked servant turns around, finds some guy who owes him a pittance and won't forgive it. And the master is troubled by this and says, I had such compassion on you in such a great debt. How could you not have a small bit of compassion for your brother, your fellow servant? Jesus takes him to task. If we flipped over to Luke chapter 15, we find that compassion, too, is a key element. In fact, it's one of the unique things about the three stories of lostness there: the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son. And I had a good Bible teacher in my 20s who said, as with the case with the Good Samaritan, you've got three stories together. You've got three examples together. And in Luke chapter 15, with the lost coin and the lost sheep, it's pretty simple to see that something lost is found and there's a great rejoicing. So what we need to notice in the story of the prodigal son is that something lost is found, but there isn't the rejoicing that we would expect. We usually focus in on the response of the father. But of course, Jesus is telling the story to the Pharisees. And say they know that the older brother is who typifies them. His lack of compassion for his brother is pointed straight at them. But what gives me real pause, I think, is not just that compassion is central to Jesus' teaching, it's that it's central to his character as well. We could go through all kinds of examples in the Gospels, but let me give you three of this phrase that says he had compassion of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 9, Jesus sees the crowds coming to him. He's just come off the boat in the Sea of Galilee. He sees the crowds coming to him, and the text says he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. In Matthew chapter 14, the feeding of the 5,000, and in fact it preludes the feeding of the 5,000, also the stories of the feeding of the 4,000. It says Jesus had compassion on the crowd and healed their sick. Matthew chapter 20, just two people happened to come up to Jesus, two blind men, and it says he had compassion on them. This is a central element of Jesus' character that we see brought up in the Gospels. And it's not just happenstance, a peculiar quirk of Jesus' personality. It's included there for a reason. It's included because the Gospel writers know that compassion is going to be one of the critical character qualities of the Messiah. It's been talked about all through the Old Testament. When God reveals himself, compassion is a key feature of who he is. Whether it's to Moses on Mount Sinai or other places, compassion comes out again and again. It's the message of the book of Hosea. But I think particularly of the book of Isaiah, chapter 49. Of course, chapter 49 is all about the servant of the Lord, the coming Messiah. But listen to verse 13. It says, "Shout for joy, you heavens, rejoice, you earth, burst into song, you mountains." Why? Well, they're looking forward to the Messiah. And how is he described? For the Lord comforts his people and will have compassion on his afflicted ones. If you flip to the beginning of the book of Luke, chapter 1, you'll notice that both in the Magnificat, that is Mary's celebration song, but also later in chapter 1, I believe it says Zechariah speaks of Jesus, they both feature the use of the word compassion repeatedly. 5 or 6 times it comes up. Already, Luke is laying the groundwork for us to get us looking for this character quality in Jesus, to figure out who he really is. Is he really the Messiah? But thinking of that Isaiah passage, it says, "Shout for joy, you heavens. Declare God's praise." And see how he treats us with compassion. And we should not think that that was just a sign for the Israelites. It's a sign for us too, that God treats us with compassion. If you asked me to describe myself before I was a Christian, I would probably do it this way. I would say, I was a person who thought I didn't really need God. I was a person who thought I was good enough. I didn't need him in my life. I was a pretty good person all on my own. And I think the true danger we get into when we're lost is not the part after we realize we were lost and we're wandering around. It's the little bit of wandering before we realize we're lost. It totally throws us off. It's that point before you realize I've departed from my map and I don't know where I'm going. It's when you're confident and you say, "Oh, I know the way to go myself." That's when you get in real trouble. And it's that realization that makes me realize, you know what? I'm lost too. I'm in need of the compassion of the Savior. I'm like a sheep with no shepherd. I need a good shepherd to have compassion on me. You need a good shepherd to have compassion on you too. And so, as I think back to the beginning, when I started this story, we don't often put ourselves in those shoes of the person who's been assaulted by the robbers, because obviously Jesus was teaching to the lawyer's point that he ought to be like the man who rescues him. But I think there's something to be said for the fact that if we want to empathize with any character in this little parable, it's probably the person who was attacked by robbers we're most like. We're in need of somebody to show us compassion. And until we realize that, it'll be pretty hard to whip up some feelings of compassion on our own. But as we realize that it's Jesus offering us his compassion, that he looks on us just the same as those 2 blind men on the road to Jerusalem, just the same as those 5,000 people needing a meal, that he looks on us and he has compassion. When we figure that out, I think then we begin to understand how we can be compassionate toward other people.